So Tamara just flew in from Ottawa, so she missed getting the love-in from this morning when Chief Ian Campbell was here saying how lovely the airport is in terms of having indigenized space. But what I thought we'd start off with is talking about your experience, Tamara, in terms of leading YVR to be climate adaptive.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shannon, and thanks also for the invitation to be here. I think it's a really important time for us to talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, and the role that it plays in two of the most confounding crises that we're facing in our community. So a little bit about YVR. I think hopefully everybody knows what the airport is. We are the second largest airport in the country. We employ 26,000 people work at YVR. We represent about, depending on the calculation, about 6 to 7% of the regional GDP. So we're a very large industrial operation, and so we're also a land-based business. So we take our reconciliation commitments very seriously, and I'll talk about those and how they influence how we think about climate. But we also know that we are, at our core, a fossil fuel-driven industry. And if it's not out of the realm of possibility in the next 10 or 15 years that if we don't get ahead of that, that we could see a cap on flying. We see that in other parts of the world. And Canada is a country that's blessed with a large geography, but a small population. And so we literally need a healthy and sustainable aviation system just to make our society and our economy work. And so I always say that flying isn't the enemy, carbon is. And if we don't figure out a way to decarbonize, then we are really going to put our community and our economy at risk. So it's from that place that we have been really leaning into what we need to do to decarbonize our business end to end, what we can do to, and we'll talk a little bit about this, to be a test bed for climate resilient technologies and business models, because we are a huge entity, and so there's lots of opportunity for that. And how we need to really be resilient and adaptive, given the fact that aviation, when you think about it, probably more than almost any other industry, is very, very affected by climate and weather, as I'm sure at one point in your life you have all experienced. So for all of those reasons, we think it's essential to our mandate to be able to serve the community and the economy that supports it. And it's also essential to future-proof our business to be able to focus on climate. So we took the pretty bold step in early 2021 to set a target of net zero for our airport. We think we're the first, Dallas-Fort Worth argues with us, but we're the first airport in North America to do that, and one of only a handful in the world. And why did we pick 2030? Because frankly, we feel some urgency around it. And the faster we can move and innovate, the more that we can decarbonize our own business, but also share those learnings. One of the great things about an airport is what works at one airport tends to work at many airports. And so if we can innovate and lead at YVR, we have an opportunity to share those learnings across the country and, in fact, across our industry. Because we all know if we're climate resilient and decarbonized at one end of the journey, it doesn't really matter if it's not at the other end. So that's the reason behind why we're taking the approach we're taking.
Fantastic. So the airport itself and the business itself is very complex. And some of it is within your control, and some of it you can influence. So maybe we'll sort of like peel back the layers one at a time. So why don't we first start maybe on the land area of YVR itself and the operations that you do have control over. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what innovations you've been approaching in terms of getting to that net zero.
Yeah, so certainly an airport is a very complex ecosystem, and there's multiple businesses that interact at the airport each and every day. So like I said, 26,000 people come to work at our airport each and every day, and we welcome anywhere between 75,000 and 85,000 people onto our airport each and every day. So, you know, we stand up the size of a medium-sized city. And it's a different city because passengers are different. each day. So it's a very dynamic environment. And while it's true we have a lot of players, the airport itself actually has quite a bit of power in terms of what happens on that land base. Historically, I think we have not always embraced the authority that we have to really take advantage of some of we give licenses to operate, we manage the airfield. Sea Island is a very large landmass. We're obviously surrounded by very sensitive ecosystems. So there's a lot that we can do that's in our direct control, but also, frankly, in our indirect control, because if you're going to work at the airport, you need a license from us to work there. We have certain standards that have to be maintained, and then we are our own permitting authority for all of the buildings, the waste systems, and all of the infrastructure that you would have at the airport. So if we start on the land base, we've done quite a bit to protect the ecosystem. We are a salmon-safe airport. We're the only salmon-safe airport, as far as we know, in the world. Now, of course, not every airport has salmon next to it, so that is a smaller data set than every airport. But still, we take our responsibilities to the waterways, one of which is a runway for the float planes, very, very seriously. We've also, through our very unique Friendship and Sustainability Agreement, which was signed in 2017 with Musquem, we are a sea island on the traditional unceded and continuously occupied territory of Musquem, and so we entered into an agreement to say that we are only temporary operators on the land, and so we have to be thoughtful about what we do to integrate Indigenous and, in particular, Musquem principles, ways of knowing, ways of communicating, ways of developing into our business. And so we've integrated Musquem land knowledge in terms of our climate policies, really helped us to know, the Fraser River is silty, right? It moves quite a bit, where it was at certain times, where there's fish population now that there wasn't before, more likely the inverse, unfortunately. Bird migration probably wasn't the best decision to build the country's second largest airport, international airport, right next to a bird sanctuary, but nonetheless, that's what we have. And so the movement of birds and aviation species are also really important. So we take a very broad view. We've actually introduced technology, have some of the best avian radar in the world, where we can look at snow geese movements to make sure that our operations are not interfering with them in a way that obviously causes safety issues, but also causes habitat disruption. So we're very active on the land base, always monitoring and using the best science and the best Indigenous knowledge to make sure that we're responsible curators of the land.
Mm-hmm. So one of the really powerful things about being a large organization is that there's a lot of power to the procurement process and what you can do with that procurement to have it align with the values and the mandate and the goals that you have. So how does that fit in with the relationship that you have with Musquem?
Yeah, there's we talk about at the airport. We talk about first of all, we talk in terms of one YVR. So what I like to say is it really doesn't matter what the color of your paycheck is. We're all working in service of, as I said earlier, the community and the economy that supports it. And we also need to do that in ways that are consistent with our values and the values of the people that we serve. So reconciliation, we look at everything we do through a reconciliation lens, including procurement. I'll get to that in a second. Climate and environmental resilience. Climate resilience is another lens that we look through. Digitization, how can we use technology to make sure we free up the human capacity to serve and to know? And then finally, we care quite a bit about our ability to be sustainable in every sense of that word, not just climate and financially, but that we're a welcoming organization for people with diverse needs, because we have a diverse population that we serve, that we're committed to transparency and accountability in everything that we do. So when it comes to procurement, yes, we procure, we are a very favored client of many, many, many companies, large and small. And so we use the procurement tool to make sure that everything from, do you have a trained archaeologist that is certified in cultural practices, working on the land when we're digging a trench, to put in some new airfield lighting in a way that if we do uncover Musquem cultural shell deposits, that their belongings are treated the way that we would respect our ancestors' belongings to be treated, even though we're doing major construction work. All the way through to, are there opportunities to employ and hire Musquem firms to make sure that we're thinking about our employment and the way that we can generate more sustainable employment for Indigenous youth, but also others in the community.
So building on that procurement piece, in terms of the innovation hub that you have at the airport, maybe you can talk a little bit about, so we have an audience where we have scientists, we have venture founders and innovators and mentors. What advice would you have for those that think that they have a solution that might help contribute to your pathway to net zero? What would be the advice you give to them? What would be the process for them to engage with the airport?
Yeah. So we are also, among all the other things I said we're also the largest building in British Columbia. So we have almost an unlimited number of use cases for problems, big and small, that need to be addressed, particularly as we're coming out of the pandemic. And one of the things we did, I think you probably know, of course, our industry was particularly affected by the pandemic, and we went from like 26 million passengers in a year to a handful. We opened a brand new $300 million international terminal right in the middle of the pandemic. It just happened to be when it was finished. To crickets, it's beautiful. It has a living forest. It has the best of sustainable practices, Indigenous language and art. But nobody was there, so we had to innovate. And actually, any movie that you see that was filmed in Vancouver that features an airport, chances are it's this terminal, because we rented it out to the film industry, who's always looking for space. So we really had to adjust our practices. But one of the things we did was we created a full digital replica of our airport. And because there was not a lot of flying going on, we were able to get a LiDAR capture of very, very high quality. In fact, we have a full digital replica, including the surrounding lands and waters of our airport, down to a 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter square size. So I joke that if somebody drops a paperclip on a runway, like, I can find it. Like, it's very, very good. And we did that inside and out. So we literally have a digital, fully functioning digital replica of the hard asset infrastructure and the operations of our airport. We're only the fourth airport that we're aware of in the world to have this technology. And what that does is it creates a digital platform for solutions. And everything from, during the pandemic, how do we measure? It's this vast building, right? Thinking about the theme of this conference, how do we detect and measure air quality and airflows? Well, we can do it the old-fashioned way, filters, HVAC systems, very inefficient, and frankly not that effective. So instead, we partnered with a local company that detects pathogens in the air to a very small size, like 5 feet by 5 feet square, which if you think about the size of the airport, that's huge. Uses AI and machine learning to communicate with our digital twin and the sensors that we have in the twin in order to monitor the pathogens section by section throughout all of the staff and passenger dense areas. And then it starts to learn and said, hey, we've got a higher level than we want here, a lower one there. What signal can we send to the old-fashioned vents that open and close in order to generate the right airflow, in order to make sure that by very small segments, we're able to monitor the air quality. We did that through the Innovation Hub. It was one of the first things that we did. They solve a problem for us, which we love. We take a little piece of the IP there. They're able to sell that IP to airports and other large commercial building users across the country and across the world. And frankly, having an airport on your list of clients is pretty good because we tend to have very high security, safety. So if it works in an airport, it's probably going to work in a daycare center or a hospital or a mall or a commercial office building. So we're a very attractive platform, and we really think we have huge opportunity to use the digital twin to do this kind of work. So if you're interested, if you have, I'm going to tell you one other example, but if you have those kinds of ideas, we do have, the Innovation Hub is on our website. We do get unsolicited proposals and ideas. We have this great team that goes out and meets to try and make sure that we're using local companies, and by local I mean Canadian, local companies with local knowledge to be able to work on international problems at a local airport so that we can generate the kind of innovation for our airport, but also for those in our economy through this great platform that is an airport.
So just to dissect that question, that example that you gave where there was a sharing of the IP. So in that example, was it a researcher that you collaborated with or a startup?
Startup.
It was a startup. Very good.
Yeah, and another example, we're current on a climate example. So we have a commitment to be net zero by 2030, and we've got a geo-exchange system, and we're looking at alternative energy. We're a huge user of energy and electricity, and while the electricity is hydroelectric and so sustainable, we operate a 24/7 building, and like I said, it's the largest in the province, so it's massive. But we don't need the same heating or cooling at midday as we do at midnight and vice versa, right? So there's a huge opportunity to store energy at midnight to be able to be deployed at midday. And so those kinds of things actually have quite a significant effect on our overall energy usage. But one of the other areas, certainly aviation, I'll talk about that in a minute, but people don't realize that a lot of emissions from aviation can be curtailed by what happens on the ground, because actually airplanes are on the ground a lot. And a lot of vehicles and equipment service airplanes when they're on the ground. And so we have literally hundreds of light-duty trucks and equipment that move bags and serve and provide safety and security monitoring and do all of those things that you see at a working airport. But they're not easily electrified, because they don't behave like they certainly don't behave like a residential fleet, but they don't even behave like a regular commercial fleet, like a UPS or a Canada Post, because most of that equipment is common use. So they don't go to a garage at night where you can easily be recharged and restored for the next day. So we actually need, and somebody will leave it, right? And then the next person from another will pick it up because they're common use equipment. So what we needed was mobile EV charging. And so we partnered with a local company, Moment Energy, that makes portable EV charging stations out of recycled batteries. So it's like awesome, win, win, win. But they were just testing it out, and they didn't have very many clients, let alone one the size of the airport. So with a bit of sponsorship from the province of British Columbia and Innovate BC, and us giving essentially the platform of the airport and our ability to collect and monitor that data through the Innovation Hub, we are the first test bed for this electric charging infrastructure. And again, if it works at our airport, probably works at every other airport as we decarbonize our industry, but also probably works at a mine, works at the marine port, works at a forestry company. There's literally hundreds of applications for this use case if we get it right. We're happy to be the first ones to do this because it helps us solve problems way faster than we could do it on our own. But we also think it's part of our mandate to be able to support innovation and decarbonization throughout our supply chain in order to support businesses.
And for those of you that are unfamiliar with Moment Energy, they were 4 undergraduates in mechatronics that came out of SFU. So we've been talking quite a bit about power storage and electrical storage. Is there any current electrical generation that's happening on the airport, or any plans for that, to have anything independent than BC Hydro?
Yeah, one of the things that it really became apparent to us really early on is we could be net zero and without too much effort, really, if we electrified everything. But we're so big that if we electrify everything, then we could easily take up about 80% of the new power that's coming on from Site C, just us alone. So that probably is not the best thing for us to do for the province. So we have said that in addition to our climate goals, we need to be developing a sustainable energy plan. And what you're seeing actually with airports that are embracing climate and climate innovation around the world, there's not that many, but there's starting to be more. They're starting to see themselves as an energy hub, right? And potentially one where we could actually be a provider of energy to surrounding communities. And we've had some preliminary conversations with BC Hydro on just that. So we're looking at the moment, we have some geo-exchange. We've talked a little bit about hydrogen and where hydrogen might fit in. But we do need to be in a place where either through storage, generation, or some combination of those two things, in a place where we can not be the huge sucking sound of sustainable power for the region. General Fusion, which you may know about, a local company with some international aspirations, they recently relocated their head office to the airport. They really like being proximate to us, and who knows, maybe that's 10 or 15 years from now, but maybe there's a fusion solution that comes our way. We're very, very open to those ideas. One of the most recent discussions around storage is, if you've come to the airport, you probably have seen our multi-story parkade done with the most sustainable concrete that we could find, but still not perfect. And it was suspended during the pandemic for obvious reasons. We now think that the highest and best use for that, because it's plumbed all for the whole thing, to each stall to have EV charging capabilities. Now that we have two-way EV charging capabilities, that we might, the rental car companies are quite interested in putting their whole Southern British Columbia electric fleet in that location. And again, cars charge and then they sit there, right? And so there's an opportunity actually for them to be storage capacity, not only for the airport, but potentially for us to sell that power back into the grid. BC Hydro is quite interested in that. And at the scale and size of the airport, we almost have the quality problem of so many use cases. Which ones to pick early and which ones to run with is actually one of the constant discussions that we're having inside, because there's so many opportunities for us to do this.
Great. So I want to segue from sort of the operations of what you have control over to the problem of sustainable aviation fuel, whether it's electrification or a myriad of different choices. Maybe you can start to tackle that. Yeah. Lay it out for the audience.
Yeah, so aviation is, as you probably know, one of the biggest single contributors to greenhouse gases. About 3% of annual greenhouse gases worldwide are generated through flight. So we have a big role to play in decarbonizing. And there's a whole pile of ideas, as you might be aware. There's Boeing, both Boeing and Airbus, the two largest commercial airplane manufacturers, both have prototypes for hydrogen aircraft. Most of those, though, most people think that's somewhere in the mid-2030s before those are licensed and operable. But the issue with that, notwithstanding how difficult it is to generate and produce truly green hydrogen, is the fact that it's a whole new design, right? Like everything, the engines are different, the wings are different, it's a completely new system, right? It's like going from steam power to electrification. And so most of the focus is what we do in the interim. And there's a couple of really interesting things that are happening. The first, that's unique to our airport, is we have the first fully electric commercial aircraft on the planet being flown out of YBR in Harbour Air's float planes. And so they've converted one de Havilland Beaver aircraft. They've now actually manufactured from scratch another one, and they're looking to locate their maintenance and their home-based facility for the first electric plane manufacturer in the world right at YVR. So we're super excited about that. But because of how heavy batteries are, of course, it only really works for short distances. So flying from Vancouver to Victoria is about perfect. Low aircraft, not that many people, but obviously the bigger the aircraft, the bigger the battery, which therefore makes that not work. So what most people are looking at is sustainable aviation fuel. And sustainable aviation fuel is just like a biofuel, any other biofuel, biodiesel or others. It uses wood waste or meat reduction, fat reduction waste, or sometimes canola, but that's not quite as sustainable, or other natural organic waste to produce fuel. And it works the same way as ethanol works in a gasoline engine, in that you blend a little bit, about 30% sustainable aviation fuel blended with 70% conventional aviation fuel or kerosene yields about a 70% reduction in GHGs, right? So it's a huge benefit. The problem is we don't have anybody producing it. If we do, it's super expensive and unreliable, and we don't have a consistent feedstock. So the state of California, as you probably know, they're a leader in many areas. They just regulated and said, look, you're going to have to use sustainable aviation fuel. We're going to ensure that it can be produced at a fair price, and therefore they have 6 refineries making some of the best sustainable aviation fuel, but it's all consumed there because you have to use it. We have potential for contracts with Neste, which is a Finnish company, the world's largest producer of sustainable aviation fuel, but their closest refinery is in Singapore. And it doesn't seem to make too much sense to us to buy sustainable aviation fuel and ship it in a bulk marine tanker all the way across the Pacific, only to put into aircraft here. So we're really looking for ways and prepared to put our capital and our platform up, as the first test bed to get local supply. Forest waste, we think, is a really good place to start, into local refinery capability that can go to the international airport, so we can have blended sustainable aviation fuel at a reasonable cost. But it's the old problem with innovation, right? There's not enough supply, so the price is too high. The price is too high, so nobody buys it. So there's not enough supply because the price is too high, so nobody buys it. And so we're stuck at the moment in that loop. We are in a privileged financial position as an airport, and we think we can be part of that solution, but we will need some regulatory changes in order to make that work.
So sort of looking forward, seeing what happened in the California example, if you were, again, going through the lens of getting to that net zero target, in the best case scenario, if everything was aligned and you could control all of the little pieces that need to make things be favorable to get the incentives that you need, what would be the steps? What would need to happen, and what would be that timeline for sustainable aviation fuel?
Well, of course, if power and money were no barrier, the timeline could be quite short. So the technology does exist to take wood waste, which I think is probably the best given our geography and given our industries. Wood waste would be refined locally at a purpose-built facility in British Columbia. It would then be shipped to our fuel facility, stored in a separate tank, and then blended, and then comes through the pipeline that we have that goes from our storage facility on the Fraser River to the airport, and then would be part of, because the way that it happens is there's not like a separate pump for Air Canada and a separate pump for WestJet, a separate pump for Lufthansa. Everybody uses the same pump, right? So they just pay by the amount that they use. So that would mean that all of the fuel that would go into every single flight, except for the lovely electric Harbour Air flights at the airport, could have this kind of climate impact. Now, we still have to get the other end of the journey. As I said, it's both ends. It's a system. It really needs to work. But if we could chart a pathway, just like we did for detection of pathogens in the air, or just like we are for electric mobile charging, or just like we're doing for so many other things, then it starts to be a lot easier for other airports, which are private companies in Canada, to raise money and financing, convince the bankers that this is not a risky bet. There's a pathway. There's players who already know how to do this, and they're right here in our own country.
So I'm going to ask one more question, but after that, we're going to go to the Slido questions. I just encourage people, if they have any questions, to put that into Slido. And the question I wanted to ask is related to resilience to climate change, which is happening where the impacts are happening outside of the airport. It's the land mass of the airport, but you're evacuating people out of the Yukon. You're evacuating people out of Kelowna. You're evacuating hospitals and long-term care homes. Very, very complex evacuation situations because of wildfires, because of floods, because of all these things that are happening, which are cascading downward effects of climate change. How do you plan for that when you're such a big provider in that community?
Well, I want to say two things about that. So certainly we have, during the pandemic, we did a lot of just really basic work because there was not a lot of other stuff going on except for keeping up with all the COVID changes and the international policy changes. We did what we call the dikes and ditches tour, which is making sure that we reinforced all of the dikes and the drainage ditches. Very basic stuff. But when the atmospheric river hit in November a couple of years back, and all of our province was cut off for 10 days, the only way that that people got from point A to point B was through the airport. We were continuously operating throughout that entire time without any disruption. We're seeing a lot of, as any of you traveled last December, we're seeing a lot of irregular winter events. You know, the kinds of things that make de-icing and safety very, very complex because our models are built. You know, you appreciate this. You don't want sort of random tests when you're flying. Very incremental procedures that are put in place that are operated over and over and over again. So we're not an industry that kind of goes this way and this way. It's very incremental. So this kind of change is very, very difficult for our industry to adjust to, from equipment to process to planning. And so again, the digital twin really came in handy because we can now run scenarios in ways that we couldn't before. We're protecting capacity in ways that we couldn't before. We're being very, very clear with data, actual data, not one pilot's perception, somebody in the control tower's perception, somebody on the ground's perception, actual data, image of what happened at what time, so we can plan our schedules accordingly so we have resilience. But the other thing that we're really looking towards is how we can think about climate resilience beyond just the airport itself. So it doesn't matter if we're flying if you can't get there. And so thinking about different ways of moving people, thinking about different ways of moving goods, and different multimodals. You know, you've probably heard about the opportunity to have high-speed rail connecting Seattle to Vancouver. I think the original plan for the terminus of that was in Surrey. I would argue it should be at YVR. We already have multimodal connection to other places, and so how do we make sure that we're putting some of our climate resilience and sustainability planning into the larger context where other initiatives are in place as well.
Very good. So we're going to move on to some of the audience questions. So I'll take a look here. So the first one is, so how do you balance and manage the work that you do at YVR with all of the other roles that you've taken on? Chancellor of SFU, Chair of Canada Infrastructure Bank, and there's a whole bunch of other ones there that are not listed.
Yeah, well, first of all, obviously I have a great team around me, people who are very, very good at what they do, and I'm just really there to support and coach. So obviously it's always about the team. And working at an airport, more than any other role I've had in my career, you know, we always talk about teamwork, but working at an airport is a true team sport. Because of the complexity, not one person, including me, can do anything without at least one other person helping us. So the collective is very, very powerful. I also myself, I'm super loyal as a friend and as a partner and as a sister and a daughter and all of that. But I'm not that loyal when it comes to professional advice. So I like to cross-train. Just like we cross-train physically, I like to cross-train from a career point of view. So I find the insights that I get when I spend time with students, which is my favorite, as Chancellor at SFU, helps me think about things when I'm thinking about what we need to do in Indigenous communities with the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Lets me think, hey, this wildfire crisis that we have, there's a really interesting solution somewhere there around supporting economic growth in Indigenous communities while establishing a national decentralized wildfire fighting service, which, what do you need to fight wildfires? You need an airstrip, you need an aircraft of some kind, you need fuel, you need water, and you need people. Those are all aviation based. Could we support communities with sustainable aviation fuel to have wildfire centers that they use when we need them, but at other times can support transport of patients, transport of goods, greater mobility and access for rural and remote Indigenous communities. That only happens because I have all three of those roles.
Thank you. So moving on now, so we have another question here about your net zero goals. So are they going to include purchasing carbon credits?
Not after 2030. So we currently use carbon credit, purchase of carbon credits today. We actually issued our first credits for sale ourselves. So we are actually getting to a place where we can issue carbon credits. So we, no, it's a true net zero commitment. I actually would love it if we got to the level of circularity, right? Where we were really, and I think we have enough diversity and enough complexity in a good way to make that a realistic goal. But no, it'll be a true net zero.
Thank you. So going back to the Innovation Hub, you described that you could email unsolicited proposals in. But the question is, are there going to be some future challenges where there'll be certain problems that are identified and there'll be a call with some money behind it to solve those problems?
We certainly have been talking about how to do that, and we have some large partners who will remain nameless, but one begins with an M and has not a hard but a soft ending in its name as a technology company, and the other is a large telecommunications company that's based in British Columbia. So you can figure out who those are. So they're quite interested in the Innovation Hub and the platform as well, because it helps them. And so we're just in the process of thinking about what that collaboration could look like, and then we could put out a call with some serious funds for a broader and more diverse scope, even though there's almost unlimited, as I said, at the airport. So stay tuned for that. That's something that probably will be coming out early in the new year.
Oh, excellent. Very good. The next question is, the 2022 winter season created significant challenges for YVR, seemingly more than previous years. And what's being done to sort of anticipate and manage potential weather-related delays for 2023 and 2024?
Yeah, we call that the 4 days in December, and they were challenging for sure. And yeah, we saw weather that we have literally never seen before. The last time we could see anything on record that was anywhere close was 84 years ago. And so we do what we always do in our industry, and I hope you do in your own companies and in your own research and your own work. That was obviously not our finest hour. So we did a full after-action review. And even though airports, I'll tell you with some humility, but also with a little bit of pride, airports across North America, many were affected by weather during the holidays this past year. Buffalo was closed for like 9 days, which never happens. And we're the only airport that I'm aware of that not only did a full after-action review of everything. We think we knew what we could do to improve, but we wanted to go through the exercise anyway. We hired an independent international third-party expert to make sure that, we were seeing things in the best and wisest possible way. We also went out and consulted the public for the first time and said, tell us what you need. Tell us what we could do better. I mean, we know what those basic things are, but what were the things that would make a difference? And we put all of that together. We released it publicly. It's on our website. You can read it. Put a $40 million commitment behind it. Everything from better weather sensing equipment. So again, there's a weather station at YVR. You probably consulted. So the weather at YVR today is, but it's actually a modeling. It's not a real sensor. Most of our weather predictions are models, just like our climate models, right? So this is actually nanotechnology that tells us second by second what's actually occurring on the ground and in the air right above the airport. So that will give us better data, and we're going to plug it into the digital twin so that all of the ecosystem at the airport has the same information. We've also changed our policies. One of the problems we had is, you may be surprised to know that the airport doesn't have the power, historically, to tow an aircraft from a gate. So if an aircraft is sitting on a gate blocking another aircraft for 17 hours in one case, for coming onto that gate, we didn't have the power to do anything. We now have clear requirements. If you're going to operate, this is what I was talking about at the beginning, we actually have more power than I think we've historically used. If you want to operate at our airport, you must have a certain number of towing vehicles available at our request at all times to move aircraft. And then we also communicated a lot more. So you can see we give you our performance data, on-time performance, baggage performance, how long it takes to go through screening, how much we're using, if it's winter, glycol, all of the nasty stuff that we like to keep in check to keep our environmental commitments high. All of that is reported on a daily basis. I don't know of any other airport on the continent that does that. So we really are, we had a pretty good summer. Our performance was very good during the summer. We're focused on the winter because we know, like, what's a cyclone bomb? And yet we had one just a couple of days ago. So these aren't winter events anymore. They're things that we're experiencing over and over again. So we're building our resilience. Our long-term plan is to get ahead with the kind of, and do our part on the GHG side, but we have to plan for vastly different scenarios than we have in the past. We're using technology. We're using Musquem indigenous knowledge that can bring all sorts of insights into what happened and what used to happen around Sea Island. And we're making that information available publicly so that others who are active in this space can share with us their insights that will help make the airport better.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Well, I'd like the audience to help join me in thanking Tamara for this great discussion.
Thank you very much.